Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I want to talk about the poetry I read in the first 2 months of 2019. Poetry is something I do find difficult to talk about. I've said before how I feel as though I have to say I like it or I didn't like it because it's an incredibly subjective thing, and also I read poetry in the wrong way. I feel like poetry should be read and gone over, and you should wonder at each line and wonder why the poet has made the decision to craft a poem in such a way, and that is not something I often do. I look at things that I like, and if I like those things and they're in the poem, then I say that I like the poem. And often I do, but I don't know why. So here we're going to have some very basic reviewing of poetry going on. And sadly, a lot of these poets I can't remember the names of because I borrowed the collections and gave them back. So when I write them in the description, that's where you'll have to search for the poet's name. And the reason I mention that is because I can't remember who wrote the first poetry collection here, and that is Catulla et al., which takes a classic story and uses it to describe events of the modern day. Whilst I was reading this poetry collection, the entire time I was reading it, I sat there thinking, I will never write poetry as good as this. The imagery within here was such that I felt like it just fit. And it could be talking about something so basic, but I was just there and I was like, yes, this is right. This is correct. And I remember seeing half rhyme, which is one of the things I love. I'm a sucker for half rhyme or rhymes in unusual places, and I like the way a poem sounds. And these poems, when I was thinking of how they would be read, just sounded great to the ear. But there was also allegory in here, and there were references to things that I had no idea what they were, but I can only imagine it was as with when I read Angela Carter a few years ago, and I really just wanted to reread these poems and go over and just unpick them all completely. I didn't have the chance to do that because I was borrowing the book and someone else wanted to borrow it. It was great, and it really made me want to write more poetry and just figure out how a person manages to write something so fantastic and so memorable and leave you just feeling somewhat uneasy about your own writing. I read Tyrannosaurus Rex versus the Corduroy Kid by Simon Armitage. We had a huge selection of Simon Armitage books brought into the shop, and so naturally I got them all. I'm going to take them back though for other people to read, but I'm going to read them myself first. Simon Armitage is someone who everyone says to read, but I haven't because he was one that was forced upon us when I was at GCSE. And I think that I understand the reason he's taught, because his poems are just fantastic. They talk about the everyday and they make it different, they make it fantastic. And once again, the way he makes his poems sound, you can begin to understand the decisions that he might have been making when he was writing the poems, why he structured the poems in such a way, which is something that I struggle with. I still don't read poetry enough in depth to go over it in that way. Yeah, we are going to just have to say with this one that I liked it. One book that I definitely didn't like was Pieces of Us. I can't remember who the writer was. I can't remember reading the book, but I know that I read it and that I didn't enjoy it. I remember thinking that the poems... I'm going to actually mention another poetry collection here, which was Rain by Don Paterson, because I felt the same way about both of them. I felt as though they never went anywhere. I felt as though they never went deeper than the surface level verse that they were writing. Like, you got the image and that was all you got. You had nothing more to unpick. You got given your line, this is with Pieces of Us, and there was just nothing more to it. It just felt like it fell flat for me, as though I wanted to get it and I didn't get it, or I did get it and it wasn't anything. And I felt the same way about Don Paterson's poetry. I don't mind rhyming it poetry. He was rhyming at the end of every line. And yeah, there was some great poems in there. And poems that I really thought were fantastic. They talked about things that just meant something to me, and they really seemed to delve deeper than the other poems did. And I don't know whether it's what in my own head I see as rhyming each line, despite it being incredibly difficult to do, I see it as somewhat juvenile, or whether I really just didn't enjoy the poems. Well, I know I didn't enjoy the poems. It's because because each line rhymed, because they weren't all as fantastic as the next one, and because I was searching for something deeper that I don't feel was there. And I ended up disappointed very much by that collection in particular, which upset me a bit, simply because I really been looking forward to reading some of Don Paterson's poetry, so it was a shame that I didn't enjoy this collection as much as I had anticipated. Next, I reread Stag Sleep by Sharon. We'd invited Jen Campbell to come to the writers group to lead a workshop, and one of the tasks was to analyse a poem, and I was searching and searching for something to analyse, and then I thought, why not just go for Sharon Olds? And then I read this collection, and it's all about divorce, all about the loss of love, and so I ended up completely avoiding that one, but and going back to the Connoisseur of Slugs, which was the first one I ever read. But Sharon Olds, she gets poetry. She writes exactly the sort of poetry that I like to read. I found that you can definitely search for deeper meaning in her poems. There's just something fantastic about the way she crafts a line, and there's something within her images that she brings the grotesque into poetry, and I like the grotesque, and I like the way she uses these images in a manner to get you to connect them to a certain part of your life. And I suppose all poets are doing that. All poets are trying to find the everyday, and they're trying to make it memorable, fantastical, and they're trying to get across to you an entire life event, something that could have lasted days, months, and they're trying to put it into less than 40 lines. And I think that Sharon Olds captures her story, whether it's her story or not, whether it's the story of some narrator she's come up with. I think she did very well with Stag Sleep, and it was good to go back and reread it, because I feel as though that way you're just able to sit and be in awe of a poet, and that's how I felt. And I was also quite glad to end on that note for February. And them's the books. I know that I don't do the best job when it comes to reviewing poetry, but I promise to try and improve in future. If you've read any of these poetry collections, then please feel free to comment. Please feel free to discuss them in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.